Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
You know, Amazon's growth is one of those stories that's almost hard to believe. So how did it get so massive, so incredibly fast? Well, it wasn't just one hit product. It was a machine, a whole system designed from the ground up for constant, relentless invention. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look inside that machine. Okay, so let's just dive right in with this quote. It's the one Brad Stone uses to open his book, Amazon Unbound, and it really sets the tone. It's a pretty provocative idea that kind of hangs over this entire story, right? It makes you ask, what does it really take to win, to invent, and to build an empire? At the very heart of this empire, you've got one person, Jeff Bezos. But here's the thing. To really understand how Amazon invents, you can't think of him as just a CEO sitting in a corner office. Nope. The engineers who actually worked with him, they had a different name for him. The Uber product manager. Because he was obsessively, almost painfully involved in every single tiny detail. And this quote, it just lays his whole philosophy bare. For Bezos, invention isn't some single stroke of genius, some aha moment. Not at all. It's about building a culture where you can experiment, make absolutely huge mistakes, and even fail spectacularly, all in the service of finding that next big thing. So where did his ideas for the future even come from? Well, a lot of the time, they came straight from the pages of science fiction. He'd see the computer from Star Trek and think, yeah, that's not fantasy. That's an inevitable future. And he wanted Amazon to be the one to build it. This wasn't just a dream for him, it was a literal product roadmap. So let's see how this whole philosophy actually built one of Amazon's most iconic products. The story of the Amazon Echo, and of course Alexa, it doesn't start in some high-tech lab. It starts with a simple conversation and a direct order from the top. This is it, right here. This is the moment the Echo was born, all in a single sentence. Bezos just brilliantly connected three incredibly powerful ideas. First, a super low price, just $20, to get it into every single home. Second, the massive power of Amazon Web Services to act as the brains in the cloud. And third, that sci-fi dream of total voice control. And this just perfectly illustrates how hands-on he was. I mean, this isn't some polished render from a design team. This is Bezos' own sketch on a whiteboard. You can see all the basic parts right there. The speaker, the microphone, the Wi-Fi. He even identified the first major hurdle for the user. How in the world do you type in a Wi-Fi password on a device that doesn't have a screen? Of course, turning that little sketch into a real product was, well, it was a monumental task. The team, codenamed Doppler, they faced these enormous challenges. Far-field speech recognition, just getting a device to hear you clearly from across a noisy room, was considered almost impossible back then. And Bezos himself created a huge debate inside the team. They wanted to focus on playing music, which was a clear, easy win. But he kept pushing them, insisting, no, it has to be more. It has to be the Star Trek computer. But here's the twist. To really understand why the Echo succeeded, we have to talk about one of Amazon's biggest failures, which was actually happening at the exact same time. The Fire Phone. This was Amazon's big swing at taking on the iPhone. It had this huge, flashy launch event, a really premium price tag, and all these gimmicky 3D features that, frankly, nobody asked for. It was a total disaster. The Echo, on the other hand, was being developed in secret. It was launched quietly, had an affordable price, and had features that were actually useful. The contrast is just stark. And that disaster? It had a price tag, a big one. Amazon had to write down $170 million in unsold Fire phones. That is a painful, public, and very, very expensive lesson. But here's the crucial part. What happened next? Bezos didn't fire the people who led the Fire phone project. In fact, he told them, promise me you won't lose a minute of sleep over this. The message sent to the entire company was crystal clear. We encourage you to take big swings here, even if you strike out spectacularly. And that culture was absolutely essential for the kinds of risks they were taking with Alexa. So the biggest risk with Alexa was just making it smart enough to be useful. I mean, competing with Google and Apple on AI seemed impossible, but Amazon had a secret weapon. So to get what they did, you first have to understand something called the data paradox. It's the classic chicken and egg problem of artificial intelligence. How do you get enough data to make your AI smart if no one will use it while it's still, dumb? Amazon's answer was a top secret program called Amped, and honestly, it was ingenious. They literally rented decoy houses, filled them with hidden Alexa prototypes, and then paid temp workers to come in all day and just talk to them. They were creating a fake controlled environment to generate the real-world data that they so desperately needed. And the scale of this whole operation was just staggering. The Amped program increased their amount of speech data by a factor of 10,000. This is how they solved the paradox. This is how they trained Alexa to be surprisingly good right from day one, essentially leapfrogging the competition. So you see, the Alexa story isn't just about one clever product. It's a perfect example of a much larger system at work, a repeatable process for invention that Bezos had been building for years. There's this quote about Thomas Edison that applies so perfectly to Jeff Bezos. His true creation wasn't the Kindle or AWS or Alexa. It was the Amazonian culture and process, the system, that could create all of them over and over again. And the results of that system? Just look at these numbers. They're wild. In less than a decade, the company's value and sheer size just exploded on a scale that's almost hard to wrap your head around. This is what the invention machine was built to produce. And that machine is built from all these unique components. Things like the famous 2 pizza teams, small enough to be fed by just 2 pizzas, which keeps them fast and independent. Or the 6-page written narratives that completely replace PowerPoint, forcing teams to think through every single detail of an idea before writing a single line of code. It's all part of this core day one philosophy, a mindset that ensures Amazon never stops acting like a hungry, scrappy startup. So, Bezos did it. He succeeded. He built an incredibly powerful, world-changing machine to invent the future. But that leaves us with one final, crucial question, the one the book's title really asks us to think about. What are the consequences for the rest of us when that machine and the massive empire it built becomes truly unbound?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got a wild story for you. It's about how Amazon's most spectacular failure secretly paved the way for one of its greatest successes ever, Alexa. So we're going to pull back the curtain on the chaotic, top secret, and ultimately triumphant creation of the Amazon Echo and its famous voice. It's a story that starts with a sci-fi dream and a massive, very public flop. So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it wasn't in some high-tech lab. Nope. It started with this pretty bold, sci-fi-inspired vision from Jeff Bezos himself. He was obsessed with the computer from Star Trek and was convinced that voice was the next big thing in computing.
And things moved fast. Look at this timeline. It goes from just a casual chat over burgers to a full-blown secret project in no time. But here's the kicker. Check out that last date. Just as they're getting started, bam, Apple launches Siri. Suddenly, the race was on, and Amazon was already feeling the heat.
And let me tell you, from day one, Bezos wasn't just some hands-off CEO. He was all in, acting as the project's, quote, Uber product manager. This is actually based on his first ever sketch of the device. He was totally obsessed with the details, even pointing out right away that just getting the thing set up was going to be a major hurdle.
Okay, so a vision is great, but actually building an artificial intelligence that could understand you from across a noisy room, back then, that was pretty much science fiction. Amazon just didn't have the tech in-house. So what do? You go shopping.
First up on their shopping list, a company called Yap. You can think of this as giving Alexa its ears. The Yap team was handed that fundamental, massive challenge of turning our spoken words into text that a computer could actually understand.
All right, so Alexa has ears. Now it needs a voice. For that, they scooped up a Polish company called Ewona, which specialized in the exact opposite problem, turning text back into a natural, human-like voice. And yep, this is basically where Alexa got that calm, recognizable voice we all know today.
Okay, ears, check. Voice, check. Now for the most important part, a brain. They acquired a company called Evie. Evie's technology is what allowed Alexa to go beyond just simple commands. It's how it could actually answer a real question, like how many planets are in the solar system. It gave it that initial spark of intelligence.
So, while this small, secret team was busy cobbling together an AI from all these different parts, something else was happening at Amazon, something much, much bigger. All the company's top talent, all the money, all the attention, it was all being poured into their A-team project, the Fire Phone.
And the Fire Phone? Oh, man, it was Bezos' baby for sure. But unlike the Echo, it was this vision that was just completely disconnected from what customers wanted. I mean, a gimmicky 3D display? And the employees knew it. Get this, some of them were so skeptical they actually bought military-style dog tags engraved with an Amazon leadership principle: disagree and commit. That tells you everything you need to know, right?
Well, in October of 2014, that skepticism proved to be dead on. Amazon had to write down a staggering $170 million in unsold Fire phones. It was a huge, very public, and pretty humiliating failure for the company.
So you'd think things couldn't get worse, right? Well, back in the secret Alexa project, things were a total disaster. The early employee prototypes were just awful. One engineer put it pretty bluntly, saying the device didn't work for shit. I mean, Alexa was slow, it was dumb, it just couldn't understand anybody.
Bezos was not happy. He got so impatient he basically stormed out of a meeting, telling the team, "You guys aren't serious about making this product." He knew what the core problem was, though. They didn't have nearly enough real-world voice data to train the AI. So he sent them packing with this massive, almost impossible problem to solve.
And their solution was kind of bonkers. It was this huge, top-secret, and frankly, super weird data collection mission they called AMPed. I mean, just look at this process. They literally rented out houses, filled them with hidden microphones, and then paid people to just talk all day. All of this just to get the voice data they needed to try and leapfrog Google and Apple.
And it got so strange that neighbors actually started calling the cops, thinking it was some kind of drug den or something. And the temp workers themselves had no clue what was going on. You gotta love this quote from one of them, who whispered right into a hidden Alexa prototype, "This is so dumb. The company behind this should be embarrassed." All right, so by November 2014, they'd fed all that secret amped data into the AI and Alexa was finally ready. But the ghost of the recent Fire Phone disaster was hanging over everything, and it forced them to completely rethink their entire launch plan. Just think about it. The two products couldn't have been more different. The Fire Phone was all about gimmicks and complexity. The Echo, it was all about being simple, useful, and practical for everyday stuff. Its design was all about function, not some flashy wow factor that nobody was asking for. So, learning their lesson, they completely flipped the script for the launch. Remember that huge, hyped-up Steve Jobs-style event for the Fire Phone? For the Echo, they just dropped a YouTube video, no fanfare. Instead of flooding the market, they started with an invite-only waiting list. They went from total overconfidence to extreme caution. And guess what? That cautious approach worked. Big time. In just a few weeks, that waiting list blew up to over 100,000 customers. Amazon knew they had a real spark on their hands.
And once Bezos saw that spark, his new strategy was simple. His words? Pour gasoline on it. He went all in, growing the Alexa organization from just a few hundred people at launch to, get this, 10,000 people in just 5 years. That's just insane growth.
And by 2019, that investment had paid off in a huge way. Amazon had sold over 100 million Echo devices. They didn't just enter a market. They literally created a whole new category of technology and completely owned it right from the start. So when you look back, it's kind of ironic, right? That massive, public, embarrassing failure of the Fire Phone ended up being the perfect instruction manual for how to make the Echo a smash hit. It taught them to be humble, to focus on actual utility, and to let customers, not just vision, lead the way. Yet, for all its undeniable success, a question still kind of hangs in the air. I mean, sure, Alexa's in millions of homes, but it still struggles with real, open-ended conversation. It leaves you wondering, is it really that all-knowing Star Trek computer Bezos dreamed of? Will it ever get there? And maybe more importantly, does it even need to? What if I told you Amazon spent over $10 million on a single convenience store? Today, we are digging into one of the most secretive and expensive bets in Amazon's history. It's a story that starts with an AI that can recognize cats and ends with a store that completely reinvents the idea of shopping. Let's get into it. So picture this. It's 2012. Jeff Bezos is on TV with Charlie Rose, and he says Amazon will only ever open a physical store if they can come up with something truly differentiated, something uniquely Amazon. And then he says they hadn't found that idea yet. Yeah, about that. That wasn't exactly the whole truth. Not even close.
because deep inside the company, a small, top-secret team, handpicked by Bezos himself, was already working on that very idea. So let's pull back the curtain on this thing. We're talking about a secret bet on stores that was years in the making.
So where did this crazy idea even come from? Well, it didn't start with groceries. It all started with cats. Seriously. Bezos read an article about how a Google AI had taught itself to recognize cats in videos, and a light bulb just went off. He became obsessed with computer vision, convinced it was the next big thing. And then he looked at the real world and saw that 90% of all shopping was still happening in physical stores. He put those two things together and pitched this wild concept for a self-service store to his top executives.
Now, you don't make a bet this big with just anybody. Bezos assembled an absolute A-team. To lead it, he brought in Steve Kessel, the guy who made the Kindle happen. Kessel then convinced Gianna Pierini to come out of retirement just for this challenge. And leading the engineering side, Dilip Kumar, who used to be Bezos' shadow, his personal technical advisor. So let's be clear, this was no side hustle. This was a top priority mission.
And to keep it all under wraps, they gave it the most mind-numbingly boring code name they could think of, IHM. It stood for Inventory Health Management. I mean, who is going to ask follow-up questions about that, right? It was the perfect disguise.
Okay, so you've got the secret team and the secret name. Now it was time to invent the secret sauce, what would become known as just walkout technology. The team started with a very simple question, one we can all relate to. What is the single worst, most annoying part of going to a store?
Yup, the checkout line. That one universal frustration became their singular obsession. Their entire mission boiled down to this. If we can kill the checkout line, we can change physical retail forever.
And this obsession led them to literally trademark a phrase for a technology that hadn't even been invented yet, just walkout technology. The vision was beautifully simple. You walk in, you grab whatever you want, and you just leave. The store would figure it all out and charge your account automatically.
A simple idea? Maybe. But the execution was an absolute beast. The system had to track dozens of people at the same time, deal with changing lights and shadows, and know the difference between you picking something up to buy it versus just putting it back. It even had to know if an item was hidden in your hand. But the final boss of retail chaos? Toddlers. Little kids running around, grabbing things, putting them in the wrong places. They were a complete nightmare for the algorithms.
So the team is grinding away at this for years, but their grand vision is about to smack right into a wall named Jeff Bezos. And this was going to lead to a massive billion-dollar pivot.
So the scene is 2015. The team is finally ready to show Bezos their baby. And it's this huge 30,000 square foot supermarket with butchers, coffee bars, the whole 9 yards. And Bezos hated it. He basically said, guys, you're building a no-line store where people have to wait in line for coffee or sliced cheese. This defeats the entire point. He told them to scrap the supermarket, think much smaller, and focus on one thing and one thing only, making the Just Walkout experience absolutely flawless.
You can just imagine the whiplash. One team member summed up that meeting perfectly. We love it, let's change everything. It was a crushing blow, for sure, but it was also a moment of extreme clarity that refocused the entire project.
So after that major pivot, the race was officially on. Amazon didn't just try one new path. They doubled down and started attacking the problem from a bunch of different angles all at once.
This is classic Amazon philosophy. Be stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. So they launched a three-pronged attack. Team 1 kept building the Go store with its ceiling cameras. Team 2 started developing the Dash Cart, which put all the computer vision tech into the shopping cart itself. And Team 3 opened Amazon Books, a totally normal bookstore, just so they could get their feet wet and learn how to run a physical retail operation.
In late 2016, the first Go store finally opened, but only to employees. And right away, they hit some major snags. The system would just crash if more than 20 people were inside. And it got totally confused when shoppers put items back on the wrong shelf. The problems were so bad they had to delay the public launch for a full year.
And here's a funny detail. The whole idea was so revolutionary that people didn't get it. Employees would finish shopping and just hesitate at the exit, like they were about to get tackled by security. It got so bad they had to put up a huge sign that literally said, "No, really, you can just walk out."
So after all those years of work, all that money and all that drama, what was the end result? Let's look at what this whole thing actually cost versus what it left behind.
All right, get ready for this number. That very first Amazon Go store, including its kitchen and its own data center, cost over $10 million. The finance executives were, as you can imagine, horrified. From any traditional business perspective, it made absolutely no sense.
But you have to zoom out to see the real picture here. In 2017 alone, Amazon spent $22.6 billion on research and development. That's way more than Alphabet or Microsoft. So a project like Go, as crazy expensive as it was just one part of a much larger strategy of making these huge, long-term, high-risk bets. Bezos actually had a great baseball analogy for this. He said, in baseball, the most runs you can score on one swing is 4, a grand slam. But in business, every once in a while, you can hit a 1,000-run home run. One single massive success can pay for all the strikeouts combined. And that's why he was willing to be so bold.
So, while they only ever opened about 26 Go stores, the legacy of Project IHM is so much bigger. Amazon now licenses that Just Walk Out tech to other retailers. It's the parent of the dash cards you see in their fresh grocery stores. And maybe most important of all, the lessons they learned from this entire venture gave them the strategic confidence to go out and acquire Whole Foods.
Which brings us right back to that baseball analogy. When you look at the enormous costs and the limited rollout, was Amazon Go a massive, expensive strikeout? Or was it just the very first swing in what could turn out to be a 1,000-run inning for artificial intelligence in the future of retail?
Today, we're diving into one of the biggest corporate showdowns of the 21st century. It's the story of how Amazon, fresh off a humiliating defeat in one massive market, decided to declare all-out war to conquer the next one. This isn't just a business case study, it's a high-stakes war for global dominance. And it all comes down to this one single command from Jeff Bezos. He said this to his India team in a really tense meeting, and it changed everything. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a total rejection of caution. It was a call for aggressive, Wild West-style risk-taking, and it was the beginning of a ruthless new strategy, all designed to avoid repeating the single biggest failure in Amazon's entire history. So, to really get why Bezos was demanding cowboys for India, you have to look back at what happened in China. China was supposed to be the first great prize, right? 1 billion new customers. But it turned into this colossal, soul-crushing failure, a lesson that directly shaped the no-holds-barred invasion of India that came next. Okay, so let's get into it. Amazon rolls into China back in 2004, and they are full of optimism. They buy a local bookseller thinking their usual playbook, low prices, reliable service would be enough to win. But that dream, it pretty quickly turned into a complete nightmare. Just look at the speed of this collapse. It is staggering. In 2011, Amazon has a respectable 15% of the market. They're a real player. But by 2016, just 5 years later, their market share has completely collapsed to less than 1%. They became a total nobody. It's just a wild example of how fast a company can fall when it just fails to adapt. So what went wrong? Well, a lot. But here's the thing. Amazon wasn't just outmaneuvered. In many ways, it defeated itself. The company tried to force its global one-size-fits-all strategy onto a market that was totally unique. They were too slow, maybe a little too arrogant, and they just completely misread the local competition and culture. Everything from website design to how much they charged their sellers. It backfired, spectacularly. And the cost of that failure? About $1 billion. That's the estimated loss Amazon racked up in China in the decade after they entered. The red ink just kept flowing until Bezos finally made the call to stop trying to compete. One finance exec even put it bluntly, they had to shoot the business in the head. This admission from a top Amazon exec at the time just says it all. We always acted as a timid follower. Timid follower, you can bet those 2 words haunted the company. They became the ghost in the machine, the very thing they were determined not to be in their next big global push. Which brings us to India. Armed with those painful billion-dollar lessons from China, Amazon got a do-over. India was the next great prize, the next billion-person market. And this time, you can be sure Jeff Bezos was absolutely determined not to be timid. And the stage was set for a pretty dramatic showdown. On one side, you have Amit Agarwal, a loyal Bezos disciple, his former shadow, and on the other, the Bansal brothers, founders of Flipkart, who had actually learned the e-commerce ropes inside Amazon before they quit to build its biggest rival. So yeah, it was personal. Before a single box was even shipped, Amazon tried to just take its rival off the board. They tried to buy Flipkart. But Flipkart's founders felt confident. They named their price $1 billion. Amazon balked, the deal died, and right then and there, the battle lines were drawn. The only way forward was a head-on collision. But this wasn't just a fight against a business rival. Oh no. It was a fight against the system itself. There was this one huge regulation, the Foreign Direct Investment Law, designed to protect millions of local mom-and-pop shops. And it meant Amazon couldn't just operate like it did everywhere else. It couldn't just buy stuff and sell it directly. They had to get creative. They had to get clever. Which brings us right back to that pivotal meeting in 2013. The India team presented a pretty conservative plan, and Bezos, still haunted by the memory of China, basically stopped them in their tracks. He was done with timid. He wanted cowboys. This quote right here, this was the turning point. Tell me how to win, then tell me how much it cost. That's basically a blank check. It was a command to stop thinking about budget and start thinking about total and complete domination. The new mission wasn't just to compete, it was to win at any cost. And Amazon put its money where its mouth was immediately. Just one day after Flipkart announced a massive $1 million funding round of its own, Amazon drops a press release announcing a $2 billion investment. It was a direct shot across the bow. It was a signal that this was going to be an all-out war of attrition. And this was the polar opposite of the China strategy. Bezos literally told his team, you shoot, 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 and then you aim a little bit. It was all about moving fast, taking huge risks, and adopting on the fly. And that last point there, test the boundaries of what is allowed by law, that tells you everything you need to know. They were willing to push right up to the legal line and maybe even step over it to get an edge. And here is a perfect example of that cowboy mentality in action. To get around those tricky investment laws, Amazon built this really complex structure. They set up a joint venture, which then created a seller firm called Cloudtail. Now, technically, Cloudtail was an independent Indian seller, but in reality, it let Amazon basically control the supply and price of all the most popular products on its own website, just like a regular retailer. It was a very clever and very controversial workaround. So for the next few years, these two companies just went at it in this brutal cash-burning war. They were fighting over exclusive smartphone deals, launching these massive dueling sales festivals, and just blanketing the entire country in ads. It got so intense that when Bezos visited India for the first time, Flipkart cheekily welcomed him with giant billboards promoting its own sales event. So what was the result of this incredibly expensive war? Amazon set out to win no matter what it took. But what was the final bill? What was the price of that victory? Well, by 2017, Amazon had done it. They achieved their main goal. They actually surpassed Flipkart in sales and became the market leader. But look at the cost. Both companies were losing over $1 billion apiece per year. They were just lighting money on fire to win. And in the process, they were totally reshaping the entire Indian retail landscape. And here's what happened next, the aftermath. The fight got so expensive that Flipkart eventually had to sell out to another global giant, Walmart, for a staggering $16 billion. Then, the Indian government, seeing all this disruption, tightened the very rules Amazon had worked so hard to get around. And caught in the crossfire of this whole corporate war, millions of small, local businesses. This quote from a shop owner in Bangalore just really hits home. It captures the human cost of this whole thing. He said, all mobile sales have gone online. Flipkart and Amazon are always advertising discounts, so who will come here? It's a powerful reminder that for every convenience of online shopping, there was a story just like this one, a small business owner just watching their livelihood dry up. So when you add it all up, what did Amazon's cowboy strategy actually get them? Well, they got market leadership, for sure. That was the big goal. But that victory came with some pretty significant and ongoing baggage. The business is still grossly unprofitable, they face new political hurdles, and now they've got a revitalized competitor backed by the deep pockets of Walmart. So in the end, yeah, the cowboy strategy worked. Amazon avoided another disaster like China and became a dominant force in India. But that victory was anything but clean. It stirred up political backlash and created huge economic disruptions, leaving behind a landscape that is, to this day, incredibly complex and turbulent. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? When these corporate giants go to war, who really pays the final price? because the battle for India shows that the costs are often paid not just by the companies themselves, but by their competitors, by local economies, and by entire communities. And the global war for the next billion customers, well, it's far from over. Just think about it. One year, tech giants are calling Amazon a joke. The next, it's a titan. Today on The Explainer, we're going to unpack this secret year that changed absolutely everything for Amazon. All right, so to really get this, we've got to rewind to late 2014. At the time, the world was, let's say, deeply skeptical of what Jeff Bezos was doing. To most people on Wall Street, Amazon looked like a company that was amazing at selling things, but just couldn't seem to make any actual money. And look, this quote from former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, it just perfectly nails the mood at the time. This wasn't just some random critic, right? This was a tech heavyweight on television, basically saying Amazon wasn't even a real business. And you know what? Ballmer kind of had a point. The numbers seem to agree with him. In 2014, Amazon didn't just not make money, they lost $250 million. I mean, that's a staggering number. Wall Street was getting pretty spooked, and the stock was down 20%. But here's the thing the skeptics were totally missing. Jeff Bezos wasn't losing money in the way you or I think about it. He was playing a different game entirely. He believed that retail profits weren't a sure thing forever, so he was taking every single dollar and plowing it back into these wild, risky bets, like Alexa and the Fire Phone, hoping one would hit the jackpot. So hidden inside this company that looked like it was bleeding cash, there was a secret, a huge one. And in April of 2015, after keeping it under wraps for years, Amazon finally decided to show its hand. And this was the million-dollar question, or maybe billion-dollar question on Wall Street. How is it possible that a company selling this much stuff is losing so much money? Where was it all going? Well, the answer was about to blow their minds. You see, for years, Amazon had been hiding its most profitable division in plain sight. They just tucked it away in this generic-sounding other category on their income statement. And this wasn't an accident. It was a brilliant strategic move to keep competitors like Microsoft and Google from catching on to the gold mine they were sitting on. So what even is AWS? Well, the simplest way to think about it is like this. AWS is the digital landlord for a massive chunk of the internet. It provides the raw computing power that runs pretty much everything from your Netflix binge watch to, NASA's Mars rover. It was the super high-tech business completely separate from just selling stuff online. And oh man, when they finally showed the numbers, the difference was just night and day. Look at this. The retail business, the thing everyone thought was Amazon, was growing okay at 25%, but look at those margins, a tiny 2.2%. But AWS, it was a completely different beast, growing at an insane 70% with these massive 19.2% margins. It wasn't just profitable, it was an absolute cash-gushing machine. Literally the second these numbers hit the street, everything changed. Wall Street's entire perception of Amazon flipped overnight. Analysts were calling it one of the biggest financial reveals in tech history. And the stock? It just went to the moon, jumping almost 15% in a single day. Okay, so now Amazon has this incredible momentum. Wall Street finally gets it. So what do? They decide to get even crazier. They decide to just invent a holiday out of thin air. The whole project, which had the codename Piñata, gets dropped on the lap of a 30-year-old manager, Megan Wolf. And the deadline? It was just impossible. Hey, Megan, go create a brand new global shopping holiday from scratch. Oh, and you've got about 4 months. Good luck. So on the one hand, Amazon is putting out press releases celebrating this massive historic sales day. But on the other hand, you had social media, which was just absolutely roasting them. People were making fun of the deals, like 15% off Pop-Tarts? Come on. It was turning into a huge PR mess. And apparently behind the scenes, Jeff Bezos was just losing it over the backlash. And this quote from Megan Wolf just says it all about Amazon's culture, doesn't it? Even after pulling off the biggest sales day in the company's entire history, the very first thing you have to say is, we messed up. That relentless, self-critical drive was a huge part of their success, but it was also the source of some major controversy. And yeah, that intense culture, it was about to be blown wide open, right on the national stage, revealing the very real human cost of all that ambition. So picture this. Amazon is on top of the world. Their stock has just soared past Walmart's for the very first time. They're celebrating, and then boom, This 5,800-word exposé from the New York Times lands like an absolute gut punch. And suddenly, Amazon's internal culture wasn't so internal anymore. It was a national debate. The article painted this brutal picture of what it was like to work there. We're talking about stories of employees crying at their desks, 80-hour work weeks being the norm, people being penalized for having personal crises like getting sick. And it all pointed to this system of what the paper called purposeful Darwinism, a set of HR mechanisms designed to just push people to their breaking point and get rid of anyone who couldn't hang. So one of the core ideas from Bezos himself was this thing called stack ranking. Basically, he believed that if you didn't force managers to do it, they'd just tolerate mediocre work. So this system made them identify and then push out their lowest performing employees every single year. Critics had a name for it: purposeful Darwinism. Now, publicly, Bezos defended the company culture, but behind the scenes, he knew the system had problems. He later used this incredibly blunt and surprising analogy to explain why they had to change their performance reviews. He basically said the old way was like telling your wife all the things you love about her and then ending with, also, you're a little bit fat. That's the only part she's going to remember. It was a surprisingly honest admission. So, despite all this controversy, by the time the dust settled at the end of 2015, you just couldn't argue with the numbers. Amazon's transformation from this money-losing weirdo into a global powerhouse, it was complete. Think about this. In just 1 year, 12 months, the company's value on the stock market more than doubled. It hit $315 billion. All those skeptics, people like Steve Ballmer, they were totally and completely silenced. And the scale they were now operating at was just off the charts. They became the fastest company in history to blow past $100 billion in annual sales. I mean, that was a goal Bezos and his team had been chasing for a long, long time. So the verdict was in. The doubters were wrong. All those huge bets they made in 2015, finally showing the world AWS and rolling the dice on Prime Day, they had paid off in a spectacular way. Amazon wasn't just a real business anymore. It was the new king of retail and tech. And that really brings us to the core question of that whole year, doesn't it? 2015 was the year that cemented Amazon's dominance, the year it finally proved to everyone it was a real business. But when you hear the stories from inside, it forces you to ask a really tough question. What was the real price of all that world-changing success?
You know, back in 2013, when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, he probably figured he was just saving a classic American newspaper, a worthy side project. What he couldn't have known was that he was also buying himself a front-row seat in the political arena, one that would set him on a crash course with the most powerful man on the planet.
So how in the world does that even happen? How does a personal passion project, bought with his own cash, light the fuse on one of the biggest public feuds we've seen in years? Well, it's wild, but the whole thing really kicks off on one single morning in December of 2015.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's late 2015. The presidential campaign is really heating up, and Donald Trump is the Republican frontrunner. Now, we all know about his, let's say, unfiltered use of Twitter. And on this particular morning, he aimed that Twitter cannon at a brand new target, Jeff Bezos.
Now, you got to understand the timing here, because this was not a random attack. This tweet landed right after the Post's fact-checker column gave one of Trump's claims a 4 Pinocchios rating. That's basically their worst possible score for dishonesty. And Trump's response? Well, it was immediate.
And this wasn't just a tweet. It was a barrage. 3 of them fired off in just 14 minutes. Now, factually, the claims were shaky at best. The Post's finances had absolutely zero to do with Amazon's tax bill. But that didn't matter. The real point was that he was intentionally smashing together Bezos' 2 worlds, the very worlds Bezos had tried so hard to keep separate.
So how does the famously quiet, analytical Jeff Bezos respond to all this? Well, his team, including his top PR guy, were all telling him, just ignore it, don't engage, don't give him the oxygen. But behind the scenes, a private email shows Bezos felt totally different. He felt it was his patriotic duty to push back, and he was actually asking his team to brainstorm ways to fight back.
And this is what they came up with. And honestly, it's pretty brilliant. It's a total head fake. Instead of getting into a messy fight about taxes, he brings up his third company, his rocket company, Blue Origin. It was witty, it was disarming, and with that one tweet, Jeff Bezos was officially in the game, pulled right out of the boardroom and into the political arena.
But hold on, how did we even get here? Why does a tech billionaire even own an old-school newspaper in the first place? For that, we gotta jump in the time machine and go back 2 years to 2013. And you might think this story starts with some grand vision, but nope, it actually started with him not being interested at all.
That was literally his first reaction when he was approached about it. He was like, why me? I'm a tech guy. But you know Bezos. He's a data guy. He's obsessed with solving hard problems. So he couldn't just say no without digging in. And the more he learned, the more he got hooked by the sheer challenge of it all. This iconic paper was in a total nosedive, and he wanted to see if he could pull it out.
And let me tell you, it was a serious nosedive. The internet didn't just hurt the Post, it absolutely gutted its business model. Craigslist killed the classifieds, web ads took the rest, it was a mess. Insiders at the time called the atmosphere one of melancholic decline. Imagine working there. Morale was just gone. Nobody had a clue what to do next.
And that's when Bezos steps in. Now this part is super important. He paid the $250 million with his own money, in cash. This was not an Amazon purchase, it was Jeff Bezos, the individual. He wanted to draw a really thick line in the sand, making it clear Amazon is Amazon and the Post is the Post.
So new owner, new rules, right? And Bezos wasn't about to be some hands-off owner who just wrote checks. Oh no. He basically took the entire Amazon playbook, the secret sauce that built an empire, and started injecting it right into the veins of this 140-year-old institution.
This was his big message to the staff, who were probably pretty bewildered by all this. He basically told them, stop mourning what you've lost and start looking at what you've gained. He pushed them to stop thinking of themselves as a DC paper and start acting like a global tech company. I mean, talk about a major mindset shift.
He brought in all these new concepts, which the staff started calling Jeffisms. The first big one was this idea of one-way versus two-way doors. He said most decisions are two-way doors. If you make a mistake, you can just walk back through and try something else. So move fast, experiment. This was completely alien to a newspaper culture where everything felt permanent.
Here's another great Jeffism, multiple paths to yes. Think about how many good ideas die just because one boss says no. Bezos hated that. He created a system where if your manager shoots down your idea, you were encouraged to go pitch it to someone else. It totally rewired the place to let good ideas bubble up from anywhere.
He also brought in his famous Amazon meeting process. The leadership team, who got the nickname the Pancake Group because Bezos made them breakfast, had to present big ideas in detailed 6-page memos, no PowerPoints. And every meeting would start with everyone sitting in total silence, just reading the memo for like 20 minutes. It sounds kind of weird, but it forced everyone to really think things through.
So, what was the result of all this? A complete transformation. I mean, night and day. The Post went from this sad, declining, local paper stuck in the past to this energetic, ambitious, digital-first powerhouse that was actually making money and was excited about the future.
Okay, so the culture changed, the vibe was better, but did it actually work? Did they make any money? Well, this is where the story gets really incredible. The turnaround wasn't just a feeling. You can see it right there in the hard data.
Get this. Early on, his new team brought him a plan that still projected them losing millions of dollars for years to come. Bezos just flat out rejected it. He told them, no, be profitable. And you know what? They did it. They went from losing money to pulling in over $100 million in profit just a few years later. It's just an amazing turnaround. And how did they do it? Subscribers. So many subscribers. Their digital subscription numbers just exploded, up 300% in just 3 years. It was proof that, yeah, people will pay for high-quality journalism if you make it essential.
And then came the ultimate symbolic victory. In late 2015, for a brief moment, they actually had more online visitors than their biggest rival, the New York Times. The Times. That's when Bezos declared that they were becoming the new paper of record. The comeback was complete. It was a resurrection. But remember where this whole story started with those tweets? Well, all this success, this renewed power and influence, it put a giant target right back on the Post's back. And the man who had first attacked them was no longer just a candidate. He was now the president of the United States.
In 2017, the Post adopted that powerful slogan you see today, "Democracy dies in darkness." And it was actually Bezos' idea. He heard it from the legendary Watergate reporter Bob Woodward. It wasn't just a marketing tagline, it was a bold mission statement for a very new and turbulent political era.
And making that kind of statement had real consequences. The president attacked the paper relentlessly, calling it the hashtag Amazon Washington Post to explicitly tie it to Bezos's business. He threatened Amazon with regulations. The Post's reporting also angered powerful foreign governments. That wall Bezos had so carefully tried to build between his companies, it was now just rubble.
Look, in the end, Jeff Bezos did what he set out to do. He saved the Washington Post. He used his unique way of thinking to reinvent a legacy institution for the modern age. But in the process, he learned a really hard truth about our world today. Influence has a price. And for him, that price would end up being far higher and far more personal than he ever could have possibly imagined.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the wild story of how the company that sells you everything, from books to, batteries, decided to wage a multi-billion-dollar war on Hollywood. And oh man, the chaos that followed.
So, you might think Amazon's invasion of Hollywood started in some boardroom, with a bunch of spreadsheets. But nope, it actually started with a party.
All right, so picture this. It's late 2016, and you're at Jeff Bezos' massive estate in Beverly Hills. He's throwing this absolutely epic party. Now, on paper, it was to celebrate his Oscar-contending film Manchester by the Sea. But really, this was way more than just a celebration. It was a shot fired right at the heart of Hollywood.
And oh boy, did that message land. I mean, everyone who was anyone in Hollywood was there. And they all got it. This wasn't just about shaking hands and making small talk. This was a full-on declaration that the old rules, they were about to be completely rewritten by a company with, well, basically infinite cash.
So how did Amazon even get to the point of throwing a party like that? Well, to get that, we actually have to rewind a few years to an idea from Bezos that was so out there that it completely baffled even his own top executives.
So, at the time, Netflix was doing the obvious thing, right? Building a simple TV subscription service. But Bezos? He comes in with this totally wild, counterintuitive pitch. Let's just give the video service away for free. See, the goal wasn't to build a new business. Nope. The goal was to make your Prime 2-day shipping membership so ridiculously valuable, so sticky, that you never ever think about canceling it.
I mean, this strategy was so unconventional that even the people inside Amazon were scratching their heads. Seriously, think about it for a second. You're going to use multi-million-dollar movies as a freebie just to sell more paper towels? It sounded absolutely nuts.
So, they started small. It was just a test, really. They put up a pretty modest $30 million to license some content just to see if this crazy idea could actually work.
But then it just exploded. In just a few years, that little $30 million experiment ballooned to a staggering $4.5 billion. Yeah, this wasn't some cute little side project anymore. This was now a core part of Amazon's entire global strategy.
Okay, so you've got this mountain of cash to spend. What's your first move? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Under their studio head, a Hollywood insider named Roy Price, they didn't go after the big, dumb blockbusters. No, they chased something else entirely. Respect.
The whole idea wasn't to try and out-Netflix with tons of content. The goal was to out-HBO on quality. They went out of their way to back visionary creators and these really risky, sophisticated stories. They wanted to prove that Amazon could be a home for serious art, not just, a place to buy stuff.
And guess what? It totally worked. A really risky show called Transparent went on to become the first streaming series ever to win a Golden Globe for Best TV Series. Just like that, in one night, Amazon was officially on the Hollywood map. They got that legitimacy they were so hungry for.
Bezos had this amazing line that just summed up the whole strategy. He said, "When we win a Golden Globe, it helps us sell more shoes." But let's be real. For a guy like Bezos, winning a few fancy awards was never going to be the end game. He wanted to win the entire culture.
And pretty much overnight, the whole mission changed. Bezos saw what was happening with HBO's Game of Thrones, this show that was a global phenomenon that everyone was talking about, and he basically issued a new, very simple directive to his team. I want my Game of Thrones.
So what happens next is kind of legendary. In this now infamous meeting, Bezos, ever the engineer, tried to basically reverse engineer a hit. He laid out a literal checklist of ingredients for an epic story. Things like a heroic protagonist, civilizational high stakes, and even wish fulfillment, like you could build a masterpiece from a blueprint.
And you can probably guess what happened next, right? A massive culture clash. You had Amazon's super data-driven engineering brain crashing right into Hollywood's creative, gut instinct way of doing things. The studio head, Roy Price, he knew you just can't hand a checklist to a writer and expect magic to happen. So, the story goes, he literally told his team to hide the list.
So as all this internal pressure is building up, something else was about to happen. A past incident involving that same studio head, Roy Price, was about to blow up and become a massive public crisis for the entire company.
And then, the ground shifted. A really serious sexual harassment allegation against Price, something that had been dealt with internally a couple of years before, suddenly came back to light. But the timing was everything. This was happening right in the middle of the #MeToo movement, this huge cultural reckoning that was taking down powerful men left and right. The second the producer, Isa Hackett, went on the record with her story, Roy Price's career at Amazon was over. Just gone in a matter of days.
It was really Hackett's words to another top Amazon executive that just cut right to the core of the problem. It laid bare the very real, human cost of a corporate culture that, frankly, had failed to protect her.
So, with Roy Price gone, Amazon Studios is heading into a whole new era. But this is where the story takes a really fascinating and kinda ironic twist. A new leader, Jennifer Salke, comes in from NBC, and she has one crystal-clear mission directly from Bezos: stop chasing awards, start chasing huge global blockbusters. The whole prestige strategy? Yeah, that was officially over.
And of course, the checkbook just opened up even wider. Under this new leadership, spending on content just skyrocketed. We're talking climbing to a jaw-dropping $7 billion a year. That hunt for their Game of Thrones was on, and money was no object.
And this is the ultimate irony of the whole story. The biggest global hits that actually delivered on Bezos' new blockbuster mission, shows like Jack Ryan and the massive superhero hit The Boys, well, they were actually developed and greenlit by the old team, the very people who were pushed out.
So after all that chaos, this whole wild journey really did cement Amazon's place as a powerhouse in entertainment. And it's wild to think it all started with that one kind of weird, counterintuitive idea: let's use movies to sell more stuff online.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? After all the billions of dollars spent, a huge corporate scandal, a complete change in strategy, the big question is still just sitting there. Was all of this chaos, this whole war on Hollywood, really worth it just to sell a few more shoes?
You know, we all call Amazon the everything store. But have you ever stopped to wonder how it actually got, well, everything? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the incredible and kind of chaotic machine that Amazon built to offer a nearly infinite selection of products. Let's get into it. Okay, so our story kicks off in a place you would never expect. Picture this. It's Miami, it's a rainy Sunday morning, and a guy named Victor Vedmed is just puttering around in his garage when he hears a knock on his front door. So he opens the door, and standing there are two men and a teenage boy. Weirdly, there's no car anywhere in sight. One of the men starts to introduce his friend, but before he can even get the words out, Victor just blurts out, "I know you." And he was right. The visitor was Jeff Bezos himself. Turns out, this was the house where he spent his high school years. He was just in the area and, on a whim, decided to see his old home. It's this really strange, almost humanizing moment that's such a wild contrast to the massive, totally impersonal machine he was busy building. And to really get what that machine is, you have to understand the one core idea that powered it all. It's a concept that absolutely obsessed Bezos and his top people: leverage. So what on earth is operating leverage? Well, to put it simply, it's all about making your sales grow way, way faster than your costs. For a company like Amazon, this meant one thing above all else: use technology and automation to get rid of expensive, unreliable human costs wherever you possibly can. And they had the perfect and kind of hilarious example of why. Back in 2013, right after Despicable Me 2 came out, some super enthusiastic manager at Amazon went and ordered a mountain of Minions merchandise. The only problem? The toys were a total bust. They ended up just sitting in warehouses collecting dust. A really expensive mistake driven by what Amazon executives called capricious human emotion. So Amazon's answer to this was a project they literally called Hands Off the Wheel. The goal was to just take humans, with all their gut feelings and bad predictions, completely out of the equation. Let the software crunch the numbers, let the algorithms predict demand for stuff like snow shovels right before a big storm, and let the computers place the orders. This was leverage in its purest form. Now, this relentless drive for leverage led them to build the two giant pillars of their selection machine. First, fulfillment by Amazon, or FBA, that's where sellers pay Amazon to store and ship their stuff. And second, the now famous third-party marketplace. And building these systems was, well, it was intense. This quote really tells you everything you need to know. In a meeting back in 2008, Bezos spotted a single wrong number in a report. He tore the report in half, threw it down the table, and just walked out of the room. Now, to the people in that room, it wasn't just a temper tantrum. It was a crystal clear message about the insane level of perfection he demanded. And yeah, those standards came straight from the top. The teams building all this stuff were guided by these little principles they called Jeffisms. Things like focus on lowering cost structure and averages are bad measures. I want to see actuals. But the really big one, the one that drove the marketplace team, was this question he would ask over and over. How would you get 1 million sellers into this marketplace? The goal wasn't just growth, it was massive, automated scale. But you know how these stories go. Just as Amazon was busy building its perfectly automated machine, a whole new kind of competitor popped up that forced them to slam their foot on the accelerator and open the floodgates to the entire world. See, companies like Wish.com had figured out this brilliant workaround. Instead of going through all the hassle of importing goods from China and then marking them up, they just asked, why not let Chinese merchants sell directly to people in the West? Sure, delivery would take forever, but the price would be ridiculously low. It was a huge wake-up call. Bezos saw the threat immediately. After talking about Wish.com, he turned to his marketplace chief, Sebastian Gunningham, and just said, very simply, "You're on this, right?" The message couldn't have been clearer. Deal with this, and deal with it now. And oh, they got on it. Amazon immediately launched Project Marco Polo, which was a massive initiative to go out and aggressively recruit thousands of sellers directly from China. They translated all their seller tools into Mandarin and built brand new logistics systems to make shipping easier. The race was officially on. And the result? It was like a Cambrian explosion of new products on the site. Just everything, everywhere, all at once. But this incredible, rapid scaling came with a very steep price, and it ended up sparking a huge internal war and unleashing absolute chaos. This basically created a huge identity crisis for the company. What kind of store was Amazon supposed to be? You had the old-school retail teams who wanted this curated, trustworthy experience with premium brands. But then you had the marketplace teams who, spurred on by Bezos, just wanted endless selection, even as that meant a flood of cheap, generic products. It was really a battle for the soul of Amazon. So when they went to Bezos to try and solve this debate, for the apparel category, should they focus on high-end brands or just cheap basics? His answer said everything. He just laughed and said, I think we should target everybody who wears clothes. By refusing to pick a side, he was really picking a side. Uninhibited selection. He wanted it all. And the consequences of that decision came hard and fast. During the 2015 holiday season, hoverboards sold on the site started literally catching on fire. Then, at Amazon's own conference, American sellers staged what was basically a mutiny because they were so furious about competing with Chinese sellers who weren't playing by the same rules. And just a couple of months after that, the shoe brand Birkenstock pulled its entire catalog from the site because they were fed up with all the counterfeits. The machine was starting to go haywire. So yeah, it was a really difficult, messy, and often damaging journey. But, and this is a big but, from a pure business perspective, the selection machine was an absolutely unbelievable success. And I mean, the numbers just don't lie. By 2019, third-party sellers were accounting for 58% of everything sold on Amazon. As Bezos himself put it in a letter to shareholders, third-party sellers are kicking our first-party butt. The strategy, for all of its chaos, had worked exactly as planned. But the cost of trying to control that chaos was just staggering. In 2019 alone, Amazon spent $500 million just on fraud prevention, on trying to stop millions of bad actors from setting up fake shops on the site. They were essentially paying to police the massive global city that they themselves had built. And this, right here, was the ultimate payoff. The incredibly high margin profits they were making from this wild, chaotic marketplace became the rocket fuel for the rest of the empire. It's what paid for Prime Video, for all those new fulfillment centers, for the big push into groceries. It turns out chaos can be very, very profitable. Which really leaves us with one final big question. The relentless, obsessive pursuit of leverage and selection built one of the most powerful companies the world has ever seen. But as we saw, that journey was littered with all sorts of unintended consequences. It makes you wonder. Leverage can definitely build an empire, but what's the true cost? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the wildest business deals in recent memory. How Amazon, the absolute king of online everything, suddenly went out and bought Whole Foods, the cathedral of organic groceries. So let's just get right into it. I mean, on the surface, you couldn't imagine two more different companies, right? You've got Whole Foods preaching conscious capitalism and mindful consumption, and then you have Amazon, an empire built on one-click convenience and just cold, hard, data-driven efficiency. So how in the world did these two end up together? Well, it's a story of two giants, each staring down the barrel of its own massive crisis. All right, so let's start with Whole Foods. By 2017, its founder, John Mackey, a guy who built this whole thing on his own principles, was basically watching his life's work start to fall apart, all thanks to the relentless pressure of Wall Street. And it's kind of wild when you see it laid out like this, just how fast things went south. For years, sales were tanking and the stock price got cut in half from its peak. You had competitors like Walmart and Kroger suddenly flooding their aisles with organic food, stealing customers left and right. And all the while, Whole Foods, with its outdated tech and Mackey's stubborn refusal to add a simple loyalty program, well, it was getting left in the dust. And when there's blood in the water, the sharks start to circle. In this case, the shark was Jaina Partners, an activist investor that saw a lost and broken company, and they were ready to pounce. Their plan was literally Mackey's worst nightmare: merge Whole Foods with a traditional supermarket. This would have completely erased the company's identity, bringing in the very Doritos and Coke that he had so famously banned. Mackey was cornered. He needed a savior, and he needed one fast. Okay, so let's flip the coin and look at Amazon's side of the story. From the outside, they looked totally unstoppable. But inside, they had this huge, frankly embarrassing problem that they just could not solve. And it had this really unfortunate acronym, CRAP. CRAP. It stands for Can't Realize a Profit. And this was Amazon's internal code for all those low-margin, everyday groceries. We're talking bottled water, snacks, fresh food, the stuff that is the absolute lifeblood of retail. And Amazon knew deep down that it could never truly own retail until it figured out groceries. In a now famous memo from 2012, one of their top execs, Doug Harrington, basically told Jeff Bezos to his face, look, unless we figure out how to sell CRACP, our insane growth is going to hit a brick wall. So they tried. Oh boy, did they try. And for the better part of a decade, they failed spectacularly. Their main project, Amazon Fresh, was just a complete money pit. I mean, one employee said they were basically stapling a $10 or $20 bill to every order. It was inefficient, it was super expensive for customers, and it was a logistical nightmare. And here's the best part, the perfect irony. Years before any of this went down, John Mackey himself publicly called Amazon Fresh the company's Waterloo. So as Fresh was just burning money, Amazon started throwing everything at the wall, which led to some of the absolute weirdest projects in its history. You had the treasure truck, think of an ice cream truck for adults selling one random thing a day. And then there was Jeff Bezos' strange personal obsession, the single cow burger. Now these things were quirky, they grabbed headlines for sure, but they did absolutely nothing to solve the real problem. How do you deliver groceries profitably at scale? And then, just like that, the entire ground shifted beneath their feet. A whole new breed of smarter, faster competitors popped up, and it turned Amazon's slow-moving experiment into what Jeff Bezos calls a land rush. You know, that critical moment where you either move incredibly fast or you lose the game forever. And you can really see the threat here. The biggest one was Instacart, and it was founded by a former Amazon engineer. The genius of it was that it had none of Amazon's baggage. It didn't need warehouses, it didn't need trucks. It was just an app that connected you with a freelance shopper at a store that was already there, including, of all places, Whole Foods. Instacart could launch in a new city practically overnight. And at the exact same time, you've got their arch-rival Google breathing down their necks with its own delivery service. And Walmart was finally getting serious about e-commerce, weaponizing its 4,500-plus stores as a massive advantage. All of a sudden, Amazon was being outmaneuvered from every direction. And this, right here, is the moment where everything changes. Our two parallel stories are about to collide. You have a cornered John Mackey getting ready to make one last desperate move, while a frustrated Amazon sees a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to solve its biggest problem in a single shot. It all started with a single phone call from an advisor to Whole Foods, which set up a top-secret meeting. Mackey flew to Seattle, met Bezos at his lakeside home, and just laid it all on the table. He basically said, look, if I have to sell to someone, you're the one company I actually respect.
So you've got these two CEOs, both famously stubborn, both visionaries in their own right, and they just hit it off immediately. Mackey said it felt like falling in love. Now for Bezos, it was probably less about love and more about finding the perfect off-the-shelf solution to his decade-long crap problem.
Amazon's response was fast and brutal. A final take-it-or-leave-it offer of $13.7 billion in cash. It was an absolutely jaw-dropping number that sent shockwaves through the entire business world.
But here's where the story gets really mind-bending. The second the deal was announced, Wall Street's confidence in Amazon was so high that its stock value exploded, adding over $15 billion to its market cap in a single day.
I want you to think about that for a second. The market literally handed Amazon the cash to buy Whole Foods, with a couple billion left over as a tip. Amazon didn't just buy a grocery store. It bought instant credibility, 460 stores in prime locations, and a perfect solution to its biggest, most expensive weakness.
So this whole deal wasn't just the end of a crisis for these two companies. No, it was the beginning of a whole new war for the future of how all of us buy our food. And Amazon wasted absolutely no time. Prime member discounts? They appeared almost overnight. Bam! Amazon lockers were installed in stores. And that trusted Whole Foods 365 brand was used to finally give Amazon's online grocery business the seal of quality it so desperately needed. So, the real takeaway here is this. This was never just a tech giant buying a grocery store. It was the endpoint of two converging paths of ambition and pure desperation, a deal literally born from crisis. And it leaves us with one big question for the future. Can a company built on algorithms and data ever really master the complicated, messy, human world of food? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. All right, let's get right into it. We all know that feeling, right? That little bit of magic when a package shows up just a day after you clicked buy. But behind that unbelievable speed is one of the most sophisticated and frankly ruthless logistics machines ever built. And at the very heart of it is a story that, well, you probably never heard. It's really become a modern miracle, one we totally take for granted. You're just scrolling, you see something you need, or maybe just want, and boom, one click and it's on its way. It's so seamless it feels like it just happens. But of course, it doesn't just happen. What's really going on in those hours between your click and that knock on your door? What kind of systems, what kind of people, and what kind of philosophy makes all of that possible? Well, it's a pretty wild story. It involves a former middle school band teacher who, believe it or not, rose to become one of the most powerful executives on the planet. It involves a massive all-in bet on an army of robots. And it involves a guy who earned the nickname the Sniper for his brutal efficiency. This is the story of how Amazon completely conquered that final mile to your doorstep. So let's start with the man at the center of this whole transformation, Dave Clark. His journey to the top of Amazon's operations is anything but typical. I mean, his career path is just improbable, to say the least. In the early 90s, he was directing a marching band with 250 seventh graders. A few years and an MBA later, he's taking an entry-level job at this fledgling company called Amazon. He actually once said that teaching kids who've never even held an instrument prepares you for a lot of challenges in life. He had absolutely no idea how big those challenges were about to get. Clark's real education in the Amazon way didn't come from some cushy Seattle boardroom. Nope. It happened in a totally chaotic fulfillment center in Campbellsville, Kentucky, right in the middle of the insane holiday rush of the early 2000s. Just try to picture this. It's a few days before Christmas, back in 2002. A massive snowstorm is about to hit.
The trucking company Amazon hired to get all these packages to the main UPS hub starts to panic, and they just leave early. They strange tons of boxes that now have no way of making it in time for Christmas.
So what does Clark do? He and his boss literally go out, rent a rider van, load up the rest of the packages themselves, and Clark gets behind the wheel. He drives this huge van through treacherous, icy roads all the way to the hub in Louisville. This right here is a perfect example of what Amazon calls customer obsession, this fanatical devotion to delivering on a promise no matter what it takes. But here's where it gets really crucial. When they finally get to the UPS facility, they're met by angry Teamsters union members who are furious that these non-union managers are doing their job. And for Clark, that single confrontation shaped a core belief that would define Amazon's strategy for decades to come, that organized labor was a roadblock, an obstacle to the kind of on-the-fly improvisation you need to serve the customer at all costs. After that trial by fire in Kentucky, Clark started climbing the ladder fast. He was getting incredible results, but he was also earning a reputation for being absolutely, utterly ruthless. He earned the nickname the Sniper. So, why? Well, because his colleagues said he would just quietly walk around and observe operations, identify any employee who was slacking or not hitting their numbers, and just fire them on the spot. It was a management style built on pure data, performance metrics, and a complete lack of sentimentality.
Now this perfectly illustrates the philosophical war that was happening inside Amazon. Clark's boss at the time, a guy named Marco Netto, he was a fanatic for the lean manufacturing method. Empower your workers, build trust. But Jeff Bezos, he had a totally different view. He was actually afraid of what he called an entrenched, disgruntled workforce. So he actively put in policies to guarantee high turnover, like capping pay raises after 3 years and firing the lowest performers every single year. And when it came down to it, it was Bezos's philosophy, not Onetto's, that Clark grabbed onto and just amplified.
This whole philosophy really set the stage for Clark's next huge move, the single biggest bet of his entire career, one that would completely reshape every single Amazon warehouse on the face of the earth. You see, Amazon's labor costs were just skyrocketing. They were hiring tens of thousands of temp workers every single holiday season. Clark saw the answer in robotics. He pushed hard for the company to buy a robotics firm called Kiva Systems. In one meeting, he famously pushed an imaginary pile of poker chips onto the table and said, "I only know one way to play poker. That's all in." And all in was definitely the right word for it. The price tag for Kiva back in 2012 was a jaw-dropping $775 million. This was the gamble, turning a variable human labor cost into a fixed, one-time technological investment. And the impact was immediate. It was profound. Instead of workers walking for miles and miles to find items on shelves, these little orange robots brought the shelves directly to them. The results, as you can see here, were just dramatic. Warehouses could suddenly hold 50% more inventory, and the amount of walking an employee had to do dropped by 90%. The job itself changed overnight, from being physically exhausting to being mentally draining and monotonous, all of it dictated by the relentless pace of software. So the warehouses were optimized. Now Clark turned his attention to the last, most complicated piece of the puzzle, actually getting that box from the warehouse to your front door. And it was a holiday disaster that would force his hand. Christmas of 2013 was a complete catastrophe. The UPS network, totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of Amazon packages, just collapsed. A furious Dave Clark swore that he would never be held hostage by a delivery partner ever again. And his response was swift, and it was massive. You can see the playbook right here. He immediately ordered 16 brand new sortation centers. Then he launched Amazon Logistics to create this huge network of independent delivery drivers. And finally, he put Amazon's own planes in the sky with Prime Air. In the wake of just one failure, he built an entire logistics empire from scratch. But this relentless drive, it came with a personal cost. When Arthur Valdez, who was Clark's old boss from Kentucky and the best man at his wedding, decided to take a job at Target, Clark just erupted. Amazon aggressively sued Valdez. And after one really contentious phone call, Dave Clark never spoke to the man who was his best man ever again. For Clark, loyalty to Amazon came before a 15-year friendship. Building this massive empire at lightning speed came with incredible benefits for us, the customers. But it also came at a really significant cost, one that was often kept hidden from view. So, the way Amazon structured this delivery network is crucial to understand. They used a model that economists call the fissured workplace. Basically, instead of hiring drivers directly, they contracted out the work to hundreds of small, independent delivery companies. This let Amazon control the entire process from top to bottom, while legally distancing itself from any responsibility for things like wages, benefits, and, most importantly, accidents.
And the human cost has been pretty shocking. Investigative reports found that drivers delivering Amazon packages were involved in more than 60 serious crashes, leading to at least 13 deaths. Lawsuits allege that the immense pressure for speed, all dictated by Amazon's algorithms, led to reckless driving. In one absolutely tragic incident, a cargo flight operated for Amazon crashed, killing all 3 people on board. The incredible speed of this empire had real-world deadly consequences.
This is how Dave Clark actually described himself. He saw his job as taking Jeff Bezos' impossibly ambitious visions and simplifying them, boiling them down into concrete, massive operational realities. And you have to admit, he was an absolute genius at it. He could take a hugely complex system and, just like he said, figure out how to make it big.
There's just no question that what Dave Clark built changed our expectations as consumers forever. The convenience of one-day delivery is now just the standard. But as we've seen, that convenience was built on ruthless efficiency, on broken friendships, and on a system that pushed huge costs and risks onto drivers and really onto society as a whole. And that leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about the next time a box shows up at our door. Was the price too high?
You know, back in 2017, a lot of people inside Amazon were starting to whisper. They were wondering if their legendary, super obsessive leader, Jeff Bezos, was, well, kind of checking out. Oh boy, were they about to get a rude awakening. I mean, you probably remember this. The internet went nuts for swole Bezos. The guy was suddenly jacked, his bank account was exploding, and it really looked like his head was in the clouds. Literally, with his space company, Blue Origin, or over at the Washington Post. He wasn't around the office as much, and you can bet his senior team was starting to breathe a little easier, maybe get a little comfortable. So you can just imagine the question floating around the executive suites at Amazon, right? Was this it? Was the era of the hyper-focused, dive-into-every-detail CEO finally over? Could they, finally relax a bit?
Well, that little fantasy of a chill Bezos, it didn't last long. It all came to a screeching halt during their big annual planning meeting. Internally, they call it OP1. It's where they map out the entire strategy for the next year. And let me tell you, it all blew up in one single legendary meeting.
Okay, so picture this. It's a classic Amazon move. The meeting kicks off in total dead silence. You've got dozens of the company's most powerful executives all sitting around this giant table just reading. They're all hunched over this dense financial report. You could cut the tension with a knife.
And where is everyone's attention? You guessed it, all eyes are glued to Bezos. He's just slowly, methodically turning the pages, and the entire room is basically holding its breath, just watching, waiting for any kind of tell, any little clue about what he's thinking. And then, there it is. Just a tiny change, but everyone sees it. His brow crinkles up a bit, his eyes get a little narrow. Something in those carefully crafted numbers has snagged his attention, and whatever it is not good. Suddenly, that silent room feels like it dropped 20 degrees.
Then he speaks, and the question he asks sounds so simple, almost like he's just thinking out loud. He says, I wonder what unit profitability was in 2017 without advertising. Now, unit profitability is just a fancy way of asking a really basic question. For every single thing we sell, are we making money or losing money? But that one simple question, it was like a bomb going off in that room. Why? Because apparently nobody had ever bothered to ask it before.
What happened next was just agonizing. The head of finance for retail, a guy named Dave Stevenson, is frantically tapping away on his smartphone trying to calculate the answer. Everyone else, just sitting there in this awful, stressful silence. It takes him 5 whole minutes to get a number, but Bezos isn't finished. Okay, now what was it for 2016? And boom, another 5 minutes of what felt like an oxygen-free room while Stevenson desperately flips through his binders.
See, that one little question from Bezos had just ripped the cover off of something huge, a massive truth that had been hiding right there in plain sight the whole time. Here's the deal. When you looked at the numbers with all that advertising money thrown in, Amazon's retail business looked great, super healthy, growing strong. But the second you pulled that advertising revenue out of the equation,
the picture changed completely. The core business, the thing that Amazon was built on, was actually getting weaker. That booming ad business was basically like a fresh coat of paint over a crumbling wall.
So yeah, Bezos had just casually tugged on one little thread, and now this whole beautiful quilt of financial success that the executives had spent months weaving together, it was completely falling apart at the seams. He told them to scrap everything. Months of planning, out the window. They were starting over.
And the irony here is just amazing. Because this advertising business, the secret hero saving the day, it had such a rocky, awkward start. I mean, Amazon was famous for being cheap, right? So no fancy parties like Google or Facebook. They had these bizarre, strict rules, no exclamation points. They'd veto certain colors. Advertisers thought they were arrogant and impossible to work with. The whole thing almost collapsed back in 2014. And now this little side project they almost killed was the only thing propping up the main business. And finding that out was about to trigger a massive, brutal reaction from the top.
So, okay, they found the problem. That's part one. But what Bezos did next, well, that was a whole other level. It was a swift, brutal, and absolutely decisive reckoning for the whole company. To really get why he reacted so strongly, you have to get inside his head a little. He has this core belief, this philosophy. For Bezos, a company is always in one of two states. It's either day one, scrappy, hungry, obsessed like a startup, or it's day two. And day two, that's when the rot sets in. It's the beginning of the end. And in that meeting, he saw the first signs of day two, and he was going to crush it.
So what the heck is a day two company? It's his personal boogeyman. It's his term for a big, successful company that gets lazy. It gets bogged down in bureaucracy, it gets slow, and worst of all, it stops caring obsessively about the customer. For Bezos, that's not just a slump, it's a death sentence. And there was no way he was going to let Amazon get that diagnosis.
So his orders came down, and they were fast and they were harsh. Number 1, slam the brakes on hiring in retail, a near-total freeze. Number 2, take an axe to all those expensive pet projects that weren't making any money. And number 3, a complete, radical shakeup of the management structure.
And that management reorganization, inside the company, it felt like a neutron bomb went off. He brought in this new rule they called span of control. It was simple. If you manage other managers, you have to have at least 6 people reporting directly to you. Now, in a way, it was genius. It vaporized layers of middle management overnight. But it was also incredibly cruel. It was this cold, impersonal formula that just destroyed careers. And in the end, something like 10 to 20% of all the retail managers were just gone.
Look, these changes were painful. No doubt about it. They were hugely disruptive. But the results? Oh, the results were absolutely spectacular. See, Bezos hadn't just plugged a leak. He had accidentally stumbled upon an absolute goldmine.
For years and years, Amazon's mantra was growth over profit, growth over profit. But this new obsession with efficiency, it had a jaw-dropping effect. Profits hit $10 billion. Now that's a big number, but to really get how massive that is,
Let's just look at the before and after. In 2017, the year of that meeting, Amazon made $3 billion in profit. Fine. But just 1 year later, in 2018, that number more than tripled. This wasn't just a small bump, it was a rocket launch. Wall Street went absolutely bonkers. It was the moment Amazon proved to the world it could be a growth monster and a profit-printing machine at the same time.
So you gotta ask, why was advertising this perfect gold mine? Well, for one, it was a super high margin business, which Bezos loves. Think about it. When you click an ad on Amazon, where do you go? You stay on Amazon. It's a closed loop that Google and Facebook could only dream of. Plus, the whole system was self-service, so they didn't need to hire a giant, expensive sales force. It was just pure, beautiful leverage, a money machine that could bankroll whatever crazy idea Amazon wanted to try next. And the end result of all this? Well, that soaring stock price made a lot of longtime Amazon employees, the ones paid in stock, very, very rich. But the biggest winner, of course, was the founder. It was in the fall of 2017, right after all this went down, that Jeff Bezos officially passed Bill Gates and became the richest person on the planet.
So it all comes back to that one simple question, doesn't it? What's our profit without ads? That question didn't just save the core business. It unleashed the most profitable part of the entire company. And it really makes you think, right? What other super simple, totally obvious questions are the giants of today too afraid to ask themselves? And what kind of secret gold mines are they just leaving buried because of it?
You know, at the very heart of the modern space race, you've got two billionaires with two completely different game plans. One guy is super methodical, almost secretive. The other, he's fast and, well, famously loud. This is the story of their secret war for the cosmos, and how one of them basically had to throw out his entire philosophy just to stay in the game.
It really is like that classic fable, right? The tortoise and the hare. So on one side, you have Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. They're the tortoise, all about moving step by step, ferociously. And on the other side, you got Elon Musk and SpaceX, the hare, just sprinting ahead at this absolutely breathtaking speed, chasing government contracts, and, let's be honest, making history.
But here's the crazy part. The patient, methodical company, backed by literally the richest man in the world, wasn't just losing. It was failing. I mean, by 2016, Blue Origin was in a full-blown crisis. So what on earth went so wrong with the tortoise's plan?
Okay, so let's dive right into the breaking point. Let's talk about the year when everything almost completely fell apart for Blue Origin.
Man, 2016 was just a brutal year for them. Their big project, the New Shepard rocket, was hit with delay after delay and what engineers have this grim little name for, rapid unscheduled disassemblies. Yeah, explosions. And while all that's happening, SpaceX is out there pulling off what seemed impossible, landing its Falcon 9 booster on a tiny drone ship in the middle of the ocean. The difference was so massive that Jeff Bezos started holding these secret, one-on-one lunches just to try and figure out what was so sick inside his own company.
And what he heard back had to be alarming. One engineer called the company a Potemkin village. You know, it looked great on the outside, but underneath it was just this deeply dysfunctional culture. Executives were complaining about terrible communication, endless meetings, and this huge growing gap between what they wanted to do and the resources they actually had to do it. So how in the world did they get here? Well, it all started with a very specific philosophy, a kind of creed that was all wrapped up in a Latin motto.
Gradatim ferocitor. Step by step, ferociously. Now, this wasn't just some catchy slogan they slapped on a t-shirt. This was the company's DNA. It was this promise to go after a massive long-term vision with deliberate, patient, but really intense focus. It was the belief system behind every single decision.
And this whole way of thinking, it comes from this secret founding document from 2004 called the Welcome Letter, which they gave to all new employees. In it, Bezos is crystal clear from day one. He literally says, "Be the tortoise and not the hare." The strategy was baked right into the company charter from the very beginning. And this whole tortoise approach was built on a few core ideas. Bezos wanted a small, nimble team, under 70 people, focused only on the long-term goals, not getting distracted chasing government money. And here's the key. He would fund the whole thing himself, so they never had to worry about impatient investors. It was supposed to be this pure, patient, and totally controlled experiment in innovation.
But, okay, while the tortoise was carefully planning out every single step, the hare was just sprinting. So let's take a look at SpaceX's completely different approach.
I mean, you couldn't find two more opposite strategies if you tried. Blue Origin was methodical, secretive, self-funded. SpaceX, they were aggressive, super public about their wins and their failures, and they were desperately chasing profits from the get-go by bidding on these huge government and commercial contracts. They were the definition of that Silicon Valley mantra, move fast and break things. And in their case, those things were very, very expensive rockets.
And just look at the result of these two totally different paths. By 2013, Blue Origin had maybe 250 employees. SpaceX had almost 3,000. This wasn't just a difference in philosophy anymore. It was a massive difference in scale, in resources, and in speed. And it was all being fueled by SpaceX's big contract wins with folks like NASA.
And this is right around when the rivalry started to get personal. In 2013, after Blue Origin filed a legal protest over a NASA contract that went to SpaceX, Musk shot back with this absolutely biting quote, basically saying Blue Origin couldn't even produce a qualified rocket. Yeah, the friendly dinners were over, the war was officially on.
So all of that brings us right back to 2016, and the moment Jeff Bezos realized his carefully crafted philosophy wasn't just failing him, it was breaking him.
This was the number that did it. His own executives came to him with a proposed budget for 2016 that was well over $500 million. Now, for a guy who built his entire company on the idea of being lean and constrained, this was a complete and utter shock. He thought spending would go up gradually, not just explode.
His reaction was furious. Remember that welcome letter where he promised he wouldn't be surprised or disappointed? Well, guess what? He was both. And this outburst, it just revealed this huge crack in the whole foundation. The very principles he set for the company were crumbling under the weight of its own problems.
But the real breaking point wasn't even about the money. It was about the culture. At a big management meeting, Bezos gets up and announces that the company president had won this prestigious award. And the room, full of all his top executives, was met with total dead silence. Nobody clapped. It was this painfully clear signal that the leadership, the culture, the whole thing was broken.
This was the moment of reckoning. Bezos knew right then and there that the tortoise strategy had failed. It was time to become the hare.
And the pivot started with a jaw-dropping announcement. Bezos just declared he would start selling $1 billion of Amazon stock every single year to fund Blue Origin. The era of playing it small was officially over. The message was loud and clear. We are now playing a very, very different game.
And the transformation was fast. A new CEO, Bob Smith, was brought in to get things running smoothly. The spending floodgates were thrown wide open. And, crucially, Bezos completely reversed his old stance and started aggressively chasing the exact same big-money government contracts that had made SpaceX so successful. And finally, the secrecy was gone, replaced by public announcements and a big push to sell his vision for humanity in space.
So Blue Origin did a total 180, right? They adopted the playbook of their biggest rival, a huge pivot born out of a crisis. But it leaves us with this one massive question. After you've built a company for 16 years on one core philosophy, can you really just rip it out and replace it? Can a tortoise actually learn to run like a hare, or is its original DNA always going to hold it back?
Back in 2017, Amazon kicked off a search for a second headquarters, and it was a really big deal. We're talking 50,000 jobs and a $5 billion investment. People were calling it the biggest corporate prize in a generation. What happened next, though, was this wild spectacle of cities bending over backward, intense political games, and some serious corporate ego. So let's dive into how this whole thing just fell apart. This whole thing was supposed to be a massive win for Amazon, a chance for city after city to sing its praises and throw money at it. But instead, it ended with this incredibly embarrassing public walkback from New York City. So how on earth did the biggest corporate prize in a generation blow up into such a public fiasco? That's the big question we're going to unpack here. To really get the HQ2 story, you got to go back to early 2018 and see where Amazon was at. The company wasn't just big, it was like a force of nature. Its market cap was rocketing past $800 billion. I mean, that's just a staggering number. It made them one of the most powerful companies on the planet, and it really seemed like nothing could stop them. But back in their hometown of Seattle, things were complicated. On the one hand, you had this incredible boom. Amazon had 45,000 employees there, took up a fifth of the city's best office space, and even built these amazing glass domes called the Spheres. But then there was the flip side, what everyone started calling the Amazon slash. Rents shot up by 67% in just 4 years. The traffic was an absolute nightmare, and rising homelessness became a huge crisis, which, as you can imagine, created a ton of political tension. All that tension brought this really important business idea into focus, the social license to operate. Now, that's not a real license you can hold. It's basically a community's goodwill, their acceptance of a company being there. And with local politicians starting to talk about a new head tax aimed right at Amazon, the company felt like its social license in Seattle was about to get revoked. So why was Amazon really looking for a new home? Well, it was a mix of things. Practically, yeah, they were running out of office space and were kind of tapping out the local tech talent. But the bigger picture, they were just sick of the political fights and really wanted to get their hands on the kind of massive government handouts that companies like Tesla and Boeing were famous for getting. And this is where Jeff Bezos steps in with this totally wild idea. Instead of the usual quiet backroom deals, he decided to turn the whole thing into a public competition, a nationwide reality show, basically, where cities would fight for Amazon's love and money. The whole point was to show how much places wanted Amazon, not how much they were starting to resent it. And boy, did it work. The response was just insane. 238 cities and regions all across North America sent in proposals. We're talking major cities, small towns, everybody wanted a piece of the action. It was this unprecedented public feeding frenzy. The bids got pretty creative and maybe a little thirsty. Calgary, for example, put up this banner right near Amazon's Seattle campus, promising to fight a bear for them. And not to be outdone, a suburb of Atlanta actually offered to break away from the county and rename itself Amazon, Georgia. I mean, wow. And then there was Tucson, Arizona, which tried to mail a 21-foot cactus to Jeff Bezos. The whole thing really felt like the corporate Hunger Games. But while all this public craziness was going on, a completely different drama was playing out inside Amazon HQ. And right here, this is where the entire process goes completely off the rails. See, after months of careful analysis, the dedicated HQ2 team came back with their picks, all based on data: Chicago, Philly, and Raleigh. But Jeff Bezos and his inner circle of top execs, the S team, they just overruled them. They pushed forward their own list: New York City, Northern Virginia, and Dallas. I mean, this was a huge pivot. The whole data-driven process was suddenly tossed out the window for what the top brass wanted. So what happened? What made them completely ignore their own team's research? The answer, ironically enough, was all happening back in Seattle. At the exact same time they were debating the HQ2 finalist, that political fight over the head tax just exploded. The Seattle City Council was pushing forward with a plan to tax Amazon for every single employee to help pay for affordable housing. Amazon's response was not subtle. It was a pure power play. They immediately stopped construction on a new 17-story tower. They threatened to lease out another huge building they just finished. And they poured money into a campaign to kill the tax. The City Council, seeing which way the wind was blowing, folded and repealed their own law. The lesson for Amazon was crystal clear. A friendly political environment was now the #1 thing they were looking for. So in November 2018, the big announcement finally came. And it was a shocker. There wasn't going to be one HQ2. Instead, Amazon was splitting the prize between two of the most powerful, most expensive, and most politically connected places in the country: New York City and Northern Virginia. The most cynical predictions had just come true. Now, in Virginia, people were basically celebrating. But in New York, the backlash was immediate and it was fierce. The newly elected Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, summed up the mood perfectly. Why was a city with a crumbling subway giving billions in subsidies to one of the richest companies in the entire world? And Amazon did absolutely nothing to help its own case. Buried deep in the deal was one of the most tone-deaf requests you could possibly imagine: a promise from the city to help them build a helipad for executives. I mean, a helipad? The optics were just awful. It became this symbol of corporate arrogance, of execs literally flying over the city's problems. But the moment of truth, the real nail in the coffin, came during this heated city council hearing. A council member asked a pretty simple question for a union town like New York: would Amazon stay neutral if its workers tried to unionize? The Amazon VP could have given some vague, lawyery answer. Instead, he just blurted out, "No, we would not agree to that." And with those 7 words, the battle for New York was pretty much over. After weeks of nonstop protests and just terrible press, Amazon had finally had enough. On Valentine's Day, 2019, of all days, in a move that completely blindsided even its own team in New York, the company announced it was pulling out. Just like that. And this chart does a great job of showing why so many of the losing cities felt totally played. Remember, the whole contest was framed around incentives. But just look at the data. Virginia's winning bid was just $573 million. That's peanuts compared to what New York and Dallas were offering. In the end, it was never really about the money. It was about political power and getting the best talent. But here's the ultimate twist, the punchline to this whole crazy story. After all that drama, after the public humiliation and canceling the New York headquarters, Amazon just kept on growing. They expanded like crazy in Virginia, sure, but also in many of the cities that lost, like Dallas and Denver. And yep, they even ended up quietly adding thousands of high-paying jobs in Manhattan, with no massive incentive package required. Which really brings us to the main takeaway from this whole saga, and it's summed up perfectly by the author Brad Stone. The HQ2 process wasn't a failure for Amazon, not really. It was a demonstration of its incredible power. After a total disaster of its own making, the company barely even blinked. Business just kept rolling, proving what a lot of people had started to fear. Amazon was getting dangerously close to invincible.
And that leaves us with one last kind of haunting question. The whole HQ2 spectacle was this rare moment where grassroots activists and local politicians actually managed to stand up to one of the world's most powerful companies and win. But what happened after suggests that even that victory was maybe just symbolic, which really makes you wonder, if our own elected leaders can't check this kind of corporate power, who can?
Today, we're diving deep into a scandal that has it all. The world's richest man, a ruthless tabloid empire, and even a little international intrigue. It's a wild one.
So, let's just jump right in, shall we? Picture this. It's Valentine's Day 2019. Jeff Bezos walks into a meeting with his top executives, and you can just imagine the tension in that room. And he breaks the ice with this one darkly funny question. At that moment, this whole scandal, it wasn't just a headline anymore. It was right there, sitting at the table with them.
So yeah, it was a week from hell for him. You have to understand, in early 2019, the world that Jeff Bezos had so carefully, so meticulously built, just completely imploded. All of a sudden, the public finds out about his divorce from Mackenzie, his wife of 25 years, and a secret affair with former TV host Lauren Sanchez. I mean, the master of control was suddenly very publicly losing his grip.
And this really gets at the two different lives Bezos was living. Publicly, he was the doting husband, the disciplined CEO, the guy who famously did the dishes every night. But behind the scenes, his colleagues were starting to notice things were off. He was spending less and less time in Seattle, and then these weird requests started popping up, like asking for helipads at Amazon's new headquarters. It was a strange little detail that made absolutely no sense, until, of course, the world found out his new girlfriend just happened to be a helicopter pilot.
And this leads us to the absolute core question of this whole insane story. How on earth did this intensely private information end up in the hands of the one publication practically built to expose it, the National Enquirer? Well, the answer? It's even more shocking than you could possibly imagine.
And that brings us to the brothers' betrayal. Because the source of this career-ending, life-altering leak, it wasn't some corporate rival, it wasn't a political enemy or some super sophisticated hacker. No. It was someone much, much closer to home. It was Lauren Sanchez's own brother, Michael.
This whole betrayal, it really unfolded in these 4 very calculated steps. First, you have the tip. Michael Sanchez calls up a reporter and talks about some Bill Gates type who's having an affair. Then comes the deal. He actually signs a contract for a massive $200,000 payout. And then he provides the evidence. Incredibly intimate texts and photos that his own sister had sent him in confidence. And to top it all off, the deception. To really seal the deal, he even faked an explicit photo of Bezos he found online. He wasn't a source, he was the only source for the entire investigation.
And listen, that $200,000, that wasn't just some casual tip-off fee. That was the most money the National Enquirer had ever paid for a story. Ever. This was a blockbuster deal, and it was built completely on a brother betraying his own sister.
Okay, so after the story breaks, things escalate, leading to what you could call the Enquirer's offer. A humiliated Bezos, he's not taking this lying down. He hires this top-tier investigator, Gavin DeBecker. And DeBecker's team starts pointing fingers not just at Michael Sanchez, but at a much bigger target, a possible political conspiracy involving President Trump, who happened to be a very close friend of the Enquirer's owner.
Now, this whole political hit job angle, it absolutely terrified the Enquirer's parent company, AMI. Why? Because they were already in hot water with the Department of Justice over a totally different issue. They had this non-prosecution agreement, and any hint that they were doing a political hit on a Trump critic, well, that could bring the full force of the federal government crashing down on them. They needed this story to just disappear, and fast.
And this is where we get to the big standoff. The Enquirer's parent company, AMI, decides the best defense is a good offense. Their top editor sends this email to Bezos' lawyer, and it's basically a thinly veiled threat. He describes in excruciating detail all the compromising photos they have in their possession, including, and I'm quoting here, a below-the-belt selfie.
And right there, that's the core of their demand. It was a classic quid pro quo. AMI promised they wouldn't publish these embarrassing photos, but only if Bezos and his team went public and said the Enquirer's reporting was totally legitimate, that it wasn't a political hit job at all. The message was crystal clear. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. Comply or face total and utter public humiliation.
But he did refuse. Instead of negotiating, instead of giving in, Bezos did the one thing they never ever saw coming. He decided to blow the whole thing wide open himself.
And what happened next? Well, it was nothing short of a public relations masterstroke. A move so bold, it completely flipped the script on the entire scandal.
Bezos gets on the website Medium and publishes this explosive 1,000-plus word essay he titled, "No Thank You, Mr. Pecker." He just lays it all out. He accuses the National Enquirer of extortion and blackmail, and then, and this is the killer move, he publishes their threatening emails in full for the entire world to read. In one single move, he completely reframed the narrative. He was no longer the unfaithful husband, he was the victim, a defender of the press, standing up to a corrupt, bullying tabloid.
The fallout from that post was immediate, and for the Enquirer, it was absolutely devastating. Overnight, public sympathy just completely swung to Bezos' side. He was now seen as a victim of weaponized journalism. The editor who sent the emails, demoted. And even better, the post triggered a federal investigation into AMI for extortion. It was a total game changer.
So, after all that dust settled, we're left with the aftermath. The lives of everyone involved were changed forever, but there were still some pretty big questions left hanging in the air. Questions that pointed to an even bigger international drama.
Yeah, so in that famous blog post, Bezos artfully dropped hints about a Saudi angle. The theory basically went like this. What if Saudi Arabia had hacked his phone? And why would they do that? Well, maybe as payback for the Washington Post's really aggressive coverage of the murder of their own columnist, Jamal Khashoggi. And later, a forensic analysis did find that the malware likely came from a video file sent from the Crown Prince's own WhatsApp account. Still, and this is important, no one ever proved a direct link between a Saudi hack and the story the National Enquirer actually published.
So, in the end, where did this leave everyone? Well, Jeff Bezos finalized his divorce and continued his very public relationship with Lauren Sanchez. His ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, walked away with $38 billion in stock and became one of the world's most influential philanthropists. Michael Sanchez, he got sued by Bezos for legal fees and ended up estranged from his family. The editor at AMI, Dylan Howard, was demoted and left a year later. And AMI itself? Well, the feds just quietly dropped the whole extortion investigation.
You know, this whole saga, with all its crazy layers of family betrayal, corporate power plays, and media manipulation, it really leaves us with a huge question for our time. In a battle between billionaires, tabloids, and powerful nation-states, who really gets to write the first draft of history anymore?
All right, let's talk about Amazon. We're going to break down that wild period when the company was at the absolute peak of its power, and suddenly it felt like everyone was coming after them. It was a full-blown backlash. So let's get right into it. So picture this. It's 2019, and Amazon just seems unstoppable. The company's value is getting close to $1 trillion. And Jeff Bezos, his personal wealth was so massive that after his divorce, it bounced back by over $60 billion in just 1 year. That's more than the entire GDP of Hungary. Amazon wasn't just on top of the world. For a lot of us, it kind of was the world. But, you know, when you get that big, that successful, it's going to create some waves. A powerful backlash started brewing. There was this growing feeling, not just in Washington, but everywhere, that maybe big tech had gotten too powerful. And Amazon was right at the center of that storm. This was the start of a real reckoning. So first, let's just set the stage here. To really get what happened, you have to understand the sheer scale of Amazon's dominance that kicked off all this intense scrutiny in the first place. Publicly, Jeff Bezos played it super cool. He basically said, hey, we're a big company, of course people are going to look at us. It's not personal. But behind the scenes, it was a totally different story. Amazon was gearing up for a war. They were actually studying how other giant retailers had failed, trying to figure out how to avoid making the same mistakes. And this is where things get really interesting, because as Amazon's influence just ballooned, it found itself in this super rare and frankly pretty uncomfortable position. It became a target for politicians on both the left and the right.
And when I say attacks from all angles, I mean it. Just look at this. On the left, you had Democrats hammering them on things like monopoly power, not paying enough in taxes, and worker wages. But then, over on the right, you had President Trump going after them constantly for their shipping contract with the post office, their big government contracts, and what he saw as biased news coverage from the Washington Post, which Bezos owns. It was a true political pincer movement.
Senator Elizabeth Warren really boiled down the core argument against Amazon with this fantastic analogy. Her point was simple, right? How can you run a fair marketplace for millions of other sellers while you're also on the field competing against them with your own products? That idea that Amazon was both the umpire and a player became a central theme in this whole debate. And this is the perfect example of Amazon's playbook for fighting back. The company put together what they called a rapid response team, and their whole job was to hit back, quickly, forcefully, and very publicly, at any criticism. This tweet is a classic example. Just deny the claim, and then immediately try to change the conversation by comparing themselves to an even bigger company. Now check this out, because this was an absolutely brilliant tactical move. Senator Bernie Sanders was coming after them hard over worker pay. But instead of just fighting back, Amazon did something unexpected. They raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, that quieted a lot of the critics, but at the same time, they got rid of stock grants for those same workers. And the best part for them? It put huge pressure on their retail rivals who couldn't afford to match that wage. They turned a huge political threat into a killer competitive advantage. So this wasn't just a political food fight. The battle was also shifting to the courtroom, and it was threatening to completely rewrite the rules of the game for monopolies in America. This was all driven by a new way of thinking that some people started calling hipster antitrust. See, for decades, this one idea, the consumer welfare standard, was basically the law of the land. It said that as long as a company's actions don't lead to higher prices for you, the customer, then there's no monopoly problem. And for a company like Amazon, famous for its low prices, that was like a get-out-of-jail-free card. Then comes this total game changer, and from the most unlikely place, a Yale law student named Lina Khan. She published this groundbreaking paper that basically said, hey everyone, you're missing the point. Her argument was that focusing only on low prices was a smokescreen. It completely ignored how a giant like Amazon could use its power to slowly bleed out and destroy its smaller competitors, which in the long run actually hurts everyone. And what is just wild is how fast her ideas caught fire. I mean, look at this timeline. Her paper comes out in 2017. 1 year later, the EU is launching an investigation. The year after that, the FTC here in the US starts one. And by July 2020, Jeff Bezos himself is forced to testify before Congress for the very first time. An academic paper had literally sparked an international firestorm. Okay, so beyond all the high-level politics and the fancy legal theories, some of the most powerful arguments against Amazon came from the people on the front lines, the small businesses that actually helped build Amazon's empire. I'm talking about the third-party sellers. You know, for years, Amazon's big talking point was how it was this incredible launch pad for small businesses. Jeff Bezos himself would highlight entrepreneurs like this guy, Wendell Morris, in his letters to shareholders. He painted this beautiful picture of a platform that could make anyone's dream of owning a business come true. But fast forward a few years, and that same entrepreneur, Wendell Morris, is telling a very, very different story. He felt his business had just been used up by the platform, becoming, and this is his quote, fertilizer for Amazon's growth. His story just perfectly captured this feeling of betrayal that so many sellers felt. And look, this wasn't just one or two people having a bad day. You started to see this clear pattern of complaints. Sellers talked about a flood of knockoffs, fees that just kept going up, and suddenly having to compete against Amazon's own copycat products. So many of them lived in this constant fear that some automated system would just suspend their account for no reason, with no one to appeal to. One lawmaker called it a relationship built on bullying, fear, and panic. So all of this, the politics, the legal challenges, the seller stories, it all came to a head in this massive 450-page congressional report. It laid out this absolutely damning case against Amazon and forced this huge national debate about whether a company like this should even be allowed to exist in its current form. And this chart right here, this is the whole debate in a nutshell. Is Amazon a monopoly that completely dominates online shopping with almost 40% of the market? Or, as Amazon would tell you, are they just another player in the much, much bigger ocean of total retail, where their share is tiny? How you answer that one question? Well, it changes everything. Well, for the lawmakers who wrote the report, there was zero doubt. Their conclusion was blunt. They said, yes, Amazon has monopoly power. Yes, it uses that power to bully small businesses. And yes, Congress should seriously think about the most radical solution of all, breaking the company up. And really, that's what this entire story boils down to. It forces us to ask this huge, fundamental question about our economy today. When a company is fantastic for us as customers, but absolutely brutal for its competitors, who are the rules supposed to protect? There's no easy answer here. And what you should really take away from all this is that this debate is far, far from over.
All right, let's get right into it. The COVID-19 pandemic, it was a crisis for the entire world. But for Amazon, it was something else. It was this perfect storm of insane demand, intense public pressure, and, well, some really deep, defining contradictions. This is the story of Amazon's completely paradoxical journey through it all.
You know, this quote from Jeff Bezos himself really sets the stakes. He sent this to employees right as the world was locking down. And he was right. Amazon instantly became this essential lifeline. People were genuinely depending on them, and you can just imagine the pressure was on from day one.
So, to really get what happened next, we have to rewind just a little bit, to right before the storm hit. At the start of 2020, Amazon seemed, well, invincible. They were this absolute corporate titan that didn't seem to play by the normal rules of business gravity.
And just think about the timing here. Early 2020, right before everything changed, Amazon's value didn't just nudge past $1 trillion, it blasted through that ceiling and just kept going. And that's not just a number on a screen, it was a symbol of its incredible, almost unimaginable economic power.
And of course, all that power was built by people, a lot of people. We're talking nearly 800,000 employees around the globe. That made Amazon the second largest private employer in the US, right behind Walmart. This massive army of workers would very quickly become the company's single biggest challenge and its most crucial asset.
And then it happened, the black swan event that no one saw coming. For Amazon, the pandemic was this bizarre dual reality. On one hand, it was a potential catastrophe for its logistics, but on the other, it was, without a doubt, the single greatest business opportunity in the company's entire history.
This right here shows you just how far ahead of the curve Amazon's leadership was. We're talking early February, weeks before a national emergency was even declared in the United States, and their top execs were already in a room with one of the world's top epidemiologists. They knew a storm was coming, and they were getting ready. So all this preparation kicked off what was basically a war on two fronts. On one side, you had the official, high-tech, very expensive response coming from corporate headquarters. And on the other side, you had the raw, often messy, on-the-ground reality for the actual workers inside the warehouses.
And that tech response was classic Amazon, right? Go big. They poured millions into thermal cameras for temperature checks, they rolled out AI to watch camera feeds to make sure people were social distancing, and they even launched this moonshot, Project Ultraviolet, to build their very own COVID testing labs. Super ambitious stuff.
But then you get stories like this from the warehouse floor. While corporate is bragging about AI, workers in an Indiana facility are looking at plastic shower curtains, like the kind you buy at Target, being hung up as barriers. The contrast is just, wow, it's jarring.
And you know, this wasn't just a one-off thing. We heard stories from all over the country of workers getting just one single disinfectant wipe for their entire shift, or being told to go hunt for their own cleaning supplies in a place they called damage land, basically where they put broken items. It's a world away from Project Ultraviolet, isn't it?
Sooner or later, something had to give, right? This massive gap between the official company line and what was actually happening in the warehouses, it was a powder keg. And when it finally exploded, Amazon's reaction would pretty much define its entire pandemic story.
And here's where it all comes to a head. This is the protest at the JFK 8 warehouse in Staten Island. It was led by an assistant manager named Chris Smalls. He and a bunch of other workers just felt that the company was putting packages and profits way ahead of their health, and they decided they had to do something about it.
And just look at how fast this went down. Smalls starts raising concerns, the company puts him on a mandatory quarantine, he organizes a protest anyway during a lunch break, and just hours later, boom, he's fired. The message from Amazon couldn't have been clearer. Speak out, and you're out.
But getting fired was just the start, because then this absolutely explosive memo from Amazon's top lawyer got leaked, and it laid out this cold, calculated PR strategy to go after Smalls personally,
to paint him as not smart or articulate, and to try and make him the face of the whole union movement, thinking it would discredit them. I mean, it's just incredible to see it written down.
And Chris Smalls wasn't the only one. There was a clear pattern. Other employees who spoke up, who organized, they were fired too. It got so bad that a vice president, a top engineer named Tim Bray, actually resigned in protest over it all. He said he couldn't stand the vein of toxicity he saw in the company.
Okay, so while all this chaos and conflict is happening inside the company, something truly mind-boggling was happening to Amazon's business. The company wasn't just surviving the pandemic, it was flourishing in a way that frankly felt almost perverse given what was going on in the world.
The numbers are just staggering. Amazon had its most profitable year ever. Revenue shot up to over $380 billion. I remember one analyst put it perfectly. He said the pandemic was like injecting Amazon with a growth hormone. And all that growth, it went straight to the top. During the pandemic, Jeff Bezos' personal net worth went up by more than 70%. That is a breathtaking amount of wealth to accumulate while the rest of the global economy was in freefall.
But here is the other side of that coin, the human cost. By the fall of 2020, Amazon itself finally released the number. Nearly 20,000 of its frontline American workers had tested positive or were presumed positive for COVID-19.
You know, the stress of that year, the conflict, the absolutely insane growth, it all added up to a massive turning point. The pandemic basically put everything at Amazon on fast forward, and that included a huge shift in the company's leadership. An era was well and truly coming to an end.
Then, in early 2021, the bombshell news dropped. Jeff Bezos, the founder, the guy who started it all in his garage, was stepping down as CEO. He handed the keys over to Andy Jassy, the genius who built Amazon Web Services, their incredibly profitable cloud business.
And it wasn't just Bezos. Jeff Wilk, the guy who basically built the modern Amazon fulfillment network and was seen by many as the soul of the company's culture, also announced he was retiring. This was a true changing of the guard. The original founding generation was stepping away from day-to-day control.
This quote, I think, just captures it perfectly. The pandemic year cemented Amazon's role in our lives in a way that's now undeniable. The author says we've stepped through a one-way door. The convenience, the reliance, it's all just woven into the fabric of our lives now. There really is no turning back.
Which really leaves us with this final, massive, unresolved question. After a year that laid bare all of its deepest flaws, but also cemented its greatest strengths, is the world, on balance, better off with Amazon in it? That's the complex, tricky legacy of Amazon's pandemic paradox.